Welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this video, I have two things I want to accomplish. One is to show you how to make some Christmas ornaments and gifts that are super easy and very beginner friendly. And two, do a thorough product review of Winsons Spray Marker. Now, I am aware that some of you won't like the fact that I'm adding color and others of you will love it. Some of you are going to hate the colors that I picked, and some of you will think it's great. And that's okay. My main goal with this is just to show you the possibilities of what can be done, and you can take that information and customize it to your personal preferences. Well, let's get started. Here is the eye-catching box the spray gun comes in. Inside is the black plastic spray gun, 5 alcohol markers, an instruction card, the recharging cord, and 5 ornate animal-themed stencils that kind of remind me of mandala art. The stencils measure 6 3/4 inches wide by 8 1/4 inches long. The spray gun is very simple. There is an on-off button on the front of the grip. The marker loading slot is on top, and the charging port is on the bottom. The spray gun weighs 6.3 ounces. The markers have color-coded caps on both ends. A white band indicates the fine point tip, making it easy to distinguish from the unmarked chisel tip. The markers weigh 0.06 ounces each and are 6 inches long. The fine point end on the marker is too large to fit in the spray gun. Only the chisel tip side fits. To use, insert the marker of your choice and align the chisel tip so that it just makes contact with the air nozzle. Press the power button and start spraying. It is possible to get smooth, uniform color with the Winsons Spray Marker. You can use the fine point tip by holding it over the air nozzle. With the fine point in, you get more spattering versus uniform color. Here's a comparison of the two sprays. Like all things, there is a learning curve with the spray marker. I sometimes have trouble getting the marker properly aligned. I also had to get used to the direction of the spray. The air nozzle is angled upward. So if you hold the gun perpendicular to the page, the spray pattern hits approximately 2 inches above the gun. You have to angle the gun downward to spray straight onto the page. The width of the spray pattern is controlled by how close you hold the gun to the page. The closer it is, the thinner the spray pattern, and the darker the color gets. If you get more than 10 inches or so away from the page, the color becomes too light to see. Winston sells replacement sets of markers. The sets start at 12 markers and go up to 262 markers. I bought this set of markers on Amazon to see if they were compatible with Winsons Spray Gun, and they are. Winsons Spray Gun is super easy to clean. Just dip a Q-tip or paper towel in alcohol and rub it over the air nozzle. I made sure the spray gun was fully charged, and I turned it on and timed how long the battery lasted. Then I recharged the battery and repeated this. I did this cycle for a total of 3 times. Each time the battery lasted 30 minutes and 30 to 60 seconds. When the spray gun is charging, the indicator light flashes red. The first time I charged the battery, it took 1 hour and 57 minutes. The second time, 2 hours and 50 minutes. The third time, 2 hours and 56 minutes. Once the battery is fully charged, the indicator light turns blue. I bought a set of 120 wooden ornaments on Amazon. I secure one of the ornaments to the board using a piece of tape that I formed into a loop. Then I positioned the stencil I wanted to use over the ornament and secured it with tape. Next, I used a mechanical pencil so I didn't have to sharpen it, and followed the stencil lines. The stencil is part of a set that I bought on Amazon, and a link to both the stencils and the ornaments will be in the video description. Use a writer pen tip and burn over the pencil lines. Burn the lines to a dark color. I have the stencil placed nearby so I can double check if I'm unsure of an area. Try to keep the heat on your burner set to get a dark result without a lot of overburn. Overburn is when the wood adjacent to where you are burning darkens up. I started out with the heat too high on my burner and was getting overburn. I reduced the heat until that stopped. On the larger areas of the design, I use circular motion as my burn stroke. Since this is a dark silhouette image, you can use any burn stroke you desire. After you're done burning, rub over the area with a pencil eraser to remove any excess graphite. And here's how it looks at this point. Load the marker of your choice and start spraying before you reach the ornament. Spray along the outer edge of the ornament so that the center remains color-free and the snowman is easily visible. Rotate the ornament as needed to make spraying easier. If desired, lightly spray over the snowman. Here's how Ornament 1 turned out. With my first attempt, I did not rotate the ornament while spraying. That wasn't a big deal. What I really disliked was how dark the color got on the snowman. I decided to lift the color using alcohol. Instead, that smeared the color, made it darker, and things looked a lot worse. That was a definite oops. Ornament 2 started out the same way as the first one. I used a stencil to draw the design onto the ornament. Then I used a writer nib and burned in the design. Afterwards, I rubbed over the design with a pencil eraser to remove excess graphite. Be aware that I am not going to show these beginning steps on the rest of the ornaments. Next, use a circle stencil and draw in the moon. Place a piece of tape over the moon and cut around the moon shape with a sharp knife. Cut 1/4 of the moon at a time. This will help keep a nice symmetrical round shape on the moon. Then carefully remove the excess tape so only the moon is covered. Use a light blue marker and spray over the entire ornament. Switch to a dark blue and spray around the edges of the ornament. If desired, reload the light blue color and respray over the entire ornament. Lastly, remove the tape and the ornament is ready. To remove carbon buildup, rub the nib on scrap paper. This will remove the worst of it, but not all of it. To remove overburn, just rub a sand eraser over the area. Sand erasers are also called ink erasers. I used a stencil that had an assortment of geometric shapes to decide how big I wanted my sun to be. I created a mask with paper. The mask opening needs to be slightly bigger than the stencil that you'll be using. I used a piece of tape to cover up a small spot where the spray could have gotten through. Then I loaded the yellow marker and sprayed in the sun. I removed the stencil unmasking and sprayed the yellow color in a wide horizontal swath over the sun. Then I switched to red and sprayed over the upper part of the ornament. Below the yellow band, I sprayed a light layer of red. I did slightly overlap the red color onto the yellow. Lastly, I used light blue and sprayed over the very top of the ornament and along the bottom. I also sprayed just a little blue on the yellow along the right side. Quite truthfully, it looked better without that. Here's the final results. After the design on this ornament has been burned in, cover each of the ornamental designs with Scotch tape. The large ornamental design took 2 pieces of tape to completely cover it. Make sure to overlap the tape. You don't want any gaps. Then use a sharp knife and cut along the outer edges of each ornamental design. I later learned it really helps to use a pencil and draw in the outer edges of the ornamental design. This would give you a line that is easy to see and follow along with. Afterwards, remove the excess tape. Only the ornamental design should be covered with tape. Now, load the marker of your choice and spray over the ornament. Always start each spray pass before you reach the ornament. Extend each spray pass past the outer edge of the ornament. This will prevent dumbbells from forming. Dumbbells are lines that have round balls at each end. After the ornament is as dark as you want it to be, remove the protective tape covering the decorative designs. Lastly, use the fine point end of the marker and color over any gaps on the background. Here's the final results. This is the only ornament I did not use a Christmas stencil on. It is also the ugliest, but it is an interesting concept with a lot of potential. Write your message on the ornament with a pencil, then burn over the pencil lines. Afterwards, draw a heart around your message. You can use a stencil or freehand it. Next, spray bands of color over the ornament. Leave gaps between the bands. I am using a red color for this initial spray. Then pick another color and spray over the gaps. I picked blue because mixed with red it will turn purple. Pour some alcohol into a small container and dip a paintbrush into that alcohol. Then paint along the heart-shaped pencil line. This will darken and slightly blend the background color. Here's the final results. With this ornament, cover the following with Scotch tape: the snow on the background trees, the tree in the back of the pickup, and the pickup. Cut away the excess tape so that only the aforementioned items are covered. Spray blue over the background on the ornament. Make the color darker along the outer edges. Also, darken up the area below the truck. This is not really an oops moment, instead it is me being an idiot. I used tape and covered everything on the stencil except the tree in the back of the truck. Then I removed the tape from the tree on the ornament and sprayed the tree green using the stencil. Why I didn't just color in the tree using a fine tip marker, I do not know. I did the same thing with the truck, except I forgot to put the stencil in place before I sprayed. Again, I have to ask, why didn't I just color the truck with a marker instead of spraying it? To try and fix this, I used a blue marker and colored over the red color on the background. Then I used an alcohol-soaked Q-tip to try and blend out the color. There was so much alcohol on that Q-tip that the color ran down into my white areas and I had to scrape that off. Definitely a lot of oopses on this ornament. Here's the final results. With the last ornament, I first sprayed a layer of red over the entire surface. Then I used a snowflake stencil and sprayed blue over it. Lastly, I used a rotary tool and carved out the snowflakes. I am using the Customizer engraver for this, but any rotary tool like a Dremel will work. Here's the final results. The wooden ornaments I bought came with twine to hang them with. I cut a section off, made a loop and tied a knot in it, and I'm gluing the ends to make sure it doesn't unravel. I took photos of the Christmas stencils I used and printed enlarged versions of them that fit my 5-inch wooden coasters. I cut them out and secured one to the board and traced over the design using graphite transfer paper. Since the design was larger, I used my largest ball nib to burn in the design. Using a different nib is the only change from the ornament version of this design, so I'm not going to waste your time explaining how to do it. since we've already covered it. Here's the final result. An ornament plus a matching coaster would make a great gift. With the ornamental design, I did play around with adding smaller versions of the design. In the end, I kept things simple. The pencil lines marking the outer edges of the designs were very helpful when it came time to cut along the tape. Here's how the coaster turned out. The coasters do not have to be Christmas themed, and that goes for the ornaments too. With this coaster, I'm creating a simple palm tree, but you could do anything like sports logos. For the palm tree, begin by drawing 2 lines for the tree trunk. Then top the tree with a rounded cone that has fringe at the bottom. Lastly, draw some long curving lines where the palm fronds will be. Use a writer nib and burn over the pencil lines. With the palm fronds, make sure to start each line in that cone area. When you get to the end of the line, lift your pen tip up quickly and that will create a nice tapered point. Once the lines are burned over, rub over the area with a pencil eraser to remove the graphite. Next, burn over the tree trunk. I'm burning in an up-down or zigzag direction using a writer nib. Depending on the size of your tree trunk, you might prefer to use a shader. The zigzag burn stroke I'm using creates a lot of texture. At some point, I reburned over it with a shader and made it a solid dark color. I didn't record that step. Burn a series of gently curved lines along one side of a frond. Then burn lines on the opposite side of this frond. Repeat the process with the next frond. Always start each line on the main frond line. When you get to the end of the line, lift your pen tip up quickly to create a tapered end. This is the same thing we did with the main frond lines. If needed, reburn over the main frond lines to darken and widen them up. Also, make sure that the cone area is darkened up. We don't want the background to show through in the cone area because that wouldn't look right. It is okay and actually desirable to have the lines overlap onto adjacent fronds. This will add to the realism. I have a bad habit of shortening my lines when I get close to other fronds, especially when I'm working near the cone area. Don't do what I'm doing. Keep the lines long and let them help further darken that cone area. With the more horizontal fronds, we will only see one side of it. With these fronds, just burn lines on one side of the main frond line, not on both. Rotate the board as needed to make burning the lines as easy as possible. There are some directions that, for whatever reason, are just more difficult to burn in. So seriously, make it easy on yourself, rotate the board when you need to. With the ground, I initially used the zigzag burn stroke. I didn't care for how that looked, so I switched to a shader and burned over it. At some point, which I did not record, I darkened up the tree trunk and expanded the size of the ground. Here's the palm tree before I did extra work, and here's the palm tree after I did the extra work. I used a stencil, paper masking, and a yellow marker to create a sun partially hidden behind a couple of the fronds. Then I removed the masking and stencil so I could spray the yellow color on the sky around the sun. I also sprayed a fairly wide horizontal band of yellow color on the background. I switched to red and sprayed over most of the remaining background. I also made sure to overlap the red a little onto the outer edges of the yellow band. Next up was blue to give a purple tinge to the sky here and there. Along the bottom of the coaster, I resprayed the blue several times to give it a darker color. Then I switched to green and sprayed that a number of times over the bottom. I wanted the bottom of the coaster to be pretty dark, so I sprayed red over it, and then I sprayed some more green. I think I got a little carried away. Here's how it turned out. You can buy cork sheets and cut pieces to size and then glue them to the back of the coaster. Or you can buy pre-cut sheets that are self-adhesive like I'm using. The cork pieces are smaller than my coasters, but I couldn't find 5-inch square cork pieces. I already had the 4-inch square, so I'm using them. I'm using Minwax polyacrylic in semi-gloss finish. I'm spraying a very light layer over the ornaments and coasters. I let everything dry for 30 minutes, then I lightly sanded over the ornaments and coasters with 220 grit sandpaper to slightly scuff the surface. This will help subsequent layers bond better. These instructions are on the back of the can, and that's what I'm following. I wiped over the ornaments and coasters to remove the dust and repeated the whole process. The ornaments received 3 layers and the coasters received 5. Simple silhouette-styled wall art is a wonderful gift to give. I'm drawing a basic tropical scene that is very similar to the palm tree coaster that I did. You can draw the same thing. You can also use stencils. You can get images from the internet. There are lots and lots of silhouette images available. Pegasus flying on a moonlit night would look great. A dragon silhouette with a fiery background would look wonderful. There are so many options you can do. My wall art is almost identical to the palm tree coaster I did. The only difference is that there are more trees, more land masses, and a boat. I'm not going to explain how to burn this image. The palm tree fronds I explained in the coaster chapter, and there's nothing more to add. This is a silhouette image that gets burned to a dark color. I think you can easily handle it. Before I move on to the spraying of the color, I will mention that the shadows in the water are nothing more than short single lines. The only thing to keep in mind is to have your shadows all angled in the same direction. Here's how the artwork looks after I was done with the pyrography. If I wasn't going to add color, I would lightly burn over the water and the sky. This should look familiar. I'm using masking and a stencil to spray in the sun. I remove all of that and spray the yellow around the sun and create a horizontal band of yellow. Then I switch to red and spray all around the yellow color. I do slightly overlap the red onto the yellow in a few places. Next, I use the light blue and spray the top of the sky and just along the horizon. I also spray over the water where I think the sun would be reflecting on it. Then I use the darker blue and spray over the rest of the water. Here's how my wall art currently looks. Todd thought that the water needed some of the sky colors reflected on it. I don't disagree with him, and I tried coloring it in with the markers on a printout and it didn't look right. Now I'm using this lion stencil and covering up everything but a couple of small shapes I want to use. I quickly discovered that the paper was making it hard to see where I was placing things. So I moved the paper out and used more tape. This worked better because I could see more of the underlying artwork to know where to place the stencil. Then I loaded the red marker and sprayed some red over the water. Here's how everything looked once I was done. Quite truthfully, I think it looked better without the reflected color. I've got a 100% cotton t-shirt secured to a board. I'm tracing a design onto the shirt using a stencil and a pencil. This actually produces trace lines that are very easy to see. Since the fabric can move around, the lines aren't always real crisp and clear. I'm using a writer nib to burn over the lines. I've got the stencil nearby as reference because some of the lines are questionable. My burner is set to get a light brown or dark tan burn result. I am using either uniform strokes or circular motion as my main burn methods. Let me state up front that this is the first time I've burned on fabric, so I'm learning and I'm definitely not an expert. I find fabric to be a bit challenging to burn on. The reason is that the nib often wants to follow in the fabric weave pattern. To counter this, use a light hand pressure when burning. It also helps to hold the fabric so it is more taut and can't move around as much. The t-shirt I'm burning on isn't very thick, so that might be part of the reason why this coming up problem happened. I burned a hole in the shirt. Oops! Think it was due to a combination of repeated reburning and using the circular motion burn stroke. Of course, at the time, I didn't know that. I thought it was due to the thinness of the fabric, but I eventually discovered I couldn't blame the fabric for all of that. Since this shirt was ruined, I could experiment. I used a shader and burned a small patch of color. My burner was set pretty high. There's visible smoke, and there was a crackling sound occurring. When I looked closely at the fabric, it looked partially melted. I scratched over it with my fingernail, and a hole appeared. Now I know not to burn at high heat. I also know to avoid using the circular motion burn stroke, especially with a writer nib. Circular motion agitates the fabric, making it more prone to fraying and creating holes. Instead, use uniform strokes or stipple. Stipple is just a fancy word for burning dots. One more thing that I've learned is to keep the reburning to a minimum. The more you burn over an area, the more fragile the fabric becomes, especially thin fabric like I'm burning on. For some reason, I did not take a picture of the t-shirt after I quit burning, probably because I knew it was ruined and I never finished it. But I did wash it to see if the pencil lines would come out. The pencil lines did get lighter, but they're not gone completely. What really surprised me were all of the holes in the shirt. I had no idea that I had created that many holes. The hints of color that you see are from another experiment I did, and I will get to that later. My next project was a 100% cotton apron. The first thing I did was a test burn. That went okay. Then it began just like the t-shirt. I secured the garment to a board and taped a stencil over the fabric. Afterwards, I traced over the stencil design using a pencil. Next, I used a writer pen tip and burned over the pencil lines. I did burn a continuous line along the outer edges of the deer. I thought this made the deer easier to see. At this point, I did not know that the circular motion burn stroke was a major part of the problem with the t-shirt. I still thought that the t-shirt got a hole in it because of how thin the fabric was. I had quit working on the t-shirt not long after that first hole had appeared. When I burned a hole in this apron, which happened on the deer's antler, that is when I realized that circular motion and reburning were issues. Eventually, I did go back and start burning on the t-shirt again, just to see if using only uniform strokes and stippling would prevent holes from forming. As you saw, it didn't. The t-shirt fabric was just too thin. So another item to add to the things I've learned is you need thicker fabric. Some of my pencil lines had smeared, so I erased them. That's when I discovered the hole in the antler. Oops. Since the graphite had a tendency to smear, I burned over all of the pencil lines and then erased the excess graphite. The eraser debris did not want to come off the apron. I used a kneadable eraser and rubbed over the deer. That cleaned things up. Then I resumed burning in the deer using only uniform strokes or stippling. Since there isn't anything to learn from that, I'm moving on to the next part. I used some of the Christmas stencils to add decorative accents around the deer. I put Merry Christmas above the deer and some snowflakes around the deer. Here's how things looked after I was done with the pyrography. I think this looks really good. Since this video is also a Winsons Spray Marker product review, I have to add some color. I started by spraying trees using a couple of the small Christmas stencils for this. One of the tree stencils had silhouettes of baby trees in front of them. I didn't care for how that looked. I colored over the background trees with the green marker, but I wanted them a little bit darker, so I recolored over them with the blue marker. I just used the green marker on the baby trees. Then I used a red marker and colored directly on the apron to accent the Merry Christmas sign. I also accented the snowflakes using the light blue marker. Lastly, I used a peach color from the other set of markers and colored over the deer. Here's how the apron looks. The back side shows that the sprayed-on color does not bleed through, but markers applied directly do. This is the back side of the t-shirt that I burned a hole in. I'm using this side to see how badly the markers spread and seep. Quite truthfully, they didn't do too bad, much better than I was expecting. So I decided to use one of the provided stencils and spray on some color. I did find out that you can stop the airflow by gently pressing the power button. The button isn't pressed all the way in so the gun doesn't turn off. It just pauses it. This makes it much easier to spot spray some smaller shapes. And here's how my t-shirt turned out. For something that took just a couple minutes to do, I think it looks pretty good. I did some research on alcohol markers. The Google AI result said that the markers were permanent on fabric. I'm hand washing both the t-shirt and the apron to test this. I will tell you now that I am not sure if AI got this right or wrong. I'll show you the results and you tell me what you think. Here's the t-shirt before and after. You can see there has been some significant fading. Here's the apron before and after. Again, there is noticeable fading. This is my last project and it uses an oversized coffee mug. I'm cleaning it with alcohol and then rubbing a dry cloth over it to make sure it is dry. Next, I attached one of the Christmas stencils. The stencils do not conform to the shape of the mug well, so I'm going to spray one ornamental design at a time. I tape the stencil in place and then use paper masking around the areas that I don't want to spray. Then I reposition everything to spray the next ornamental design. Here's how it looked when I was done. You can rub your finger over it, it doesn't smear. If you don't like it, use an alcohol-soaked cotton ball or cloth and remove it. To make the design permanent, you need to spray on a food-safe coating. I like to use lacquer for that. Also, only hand wash your item. Here's how my final cup turned out. You can make this a wonderful gift by adding a matching coaster, ornament, and filling the cup with some candies, hot chocolate mixes, coffee, whatever you think the recipient would like. You can also turn this into a temporary display. Add some decorative stuff around it, and when your guests leave, they can pick a mug and take it home with them. Well, that is it for this video. I do think that the Winsons Spray Marker is a great value. Is it as good as a professional airbrush? No, but you couldn't buy an airbrush for the cost of the Winsons Spray Marker, let alone a compressor that you would need to run a professional airbrush. The other thing I want to mention is that the 30-minute battery life might not seem like a lot, but I did almost all of these projects on one battery charge and I haven't depleted it. I honestly think that you would run out of things to spray on before you used up the battery charge. I will have a link and a discount code for the spray marker in the video description. Well, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.